ecological dynamics purists have a pretty strong and valid pushback against people who are doing hybrid models. And I don't know what the truth is about doing a hybrid model or not is.
Hey,
However, I think what we're looking at is we are practicing in pretty old school Japanese martial art, and we enjoy doing the lineage material. And to some extent, there's going to be an IP way of looking at that because the moves are sequential and there are things in the scroll, so to speak. And some people want to say, because I'm helping preserve the martial art, and that's totally fine. The art's
oh,
preserved at this
oh,
point.
kinda,
The
kinda.
scrolls exist. Say again?
Yeah, well, that's the hardest pushback point is I think, and I've had this discussion with some folks is, are you preserving this martial art if you don't at least make it functional for you? I know that's a little bit of change up in what's in there, but we got it. I think everybody I know that got into old school martial arts got into it because they figured this stuff works.
Yeah, well, for one thing, we hear the talking points that if it survived in the battlefields of Japan during the warring states, then it's now. When we have no idea in reality what we would call an ID informational processing way back
Sure.
then. What we might be seeing now are the people who happen to survive and they
Mhm.
need some way without YouTube hundreds of years ago of
Hey.
preserving what they thought was this is what I did. This is a lesson from the battlefield. Here are
Mhm.
some you might be able to do to survive this situation when there's guys running at you with swords and somebody's grabbing hold of it. You have to do this, that, and the other thing. And over hundreds of years, we've now had these things codified now. And so,
We hope so, right? Yeah.
yeah, we practice these things in a very sequential sort of a way, and we learn different techniques in the scrolls and different scroll levels, so to speak. Um, and I think that what we're really looking at here is there's the lineage practice that we happen to be doing, and there are coaching methodologies and language patterns, et cetera, that come from more contemporary theories that actually can still apply to coaches today to actually teach things that would probably still be labeled informational processing, but to do that more efficiently so that people can essentially memorize the choreography. Yeah, and then also what we're doing is ecological dynamics for effectiveness. And some of this, there's some crossover in there, but it's not a hybrid approach necessarily. It's two separate things in the same school or two
God, here's yeah,
units.
yeah. I think where people do correctly push back and say, "Oh, you can't do both," is it
Right.
because they're not change that. I think they say you can't be an ecological dynamics guy and an information processing guy, and I think that's true because it's a question of, hey, how do you think people learn motor skills? And well,
Mhm.
you truly do either think they learn this way or that way because there's very little way that they're going to do both, but the tool you use can change within those paradigms. Say more if you're an eco believer, you say people believe through they learn through their experiences, their guided experiences ideally. Then you ask, how do I guide their experiences ideally? And you start to find things like a constraints led approach, which a lot of us agree with. That constraints led approach can work in the how do I teach choreography model. It's a little gangly, and that's something that found challenging is how do I
Mhm.
use why not just teach them the choreography? Well, they want it to be functional. Well, that sounds like this thing. I think on the flip side, if you believe people only learn motor skills by being led down the path of information processing and their homunculus up in their brain makes their body do the things and respond to whatever the stimuli are, then boy, you're going to be hard pressed to think that you could use a constraints led approach to teach that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but on the tool, but they are mutually exclusive on the belief that makes you want to choose that tool.
Yeah, we have so many modern metaphors as if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
These types of things, and so we practice some informational processing way, and I think we call this process oriented learning in our current paradigm, as opposed to object
Yes.
oriented.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
If you're focused on the outcome, the object. Yeah.
yeah, and there's I think what is a misconception of just practicing the perfect practice, as perfect as you could possibly get of the choreography, that will then somehow magically translate to now I can do
Yeah.
this under any set of variables in a way that where you need to find effectiveness and
Yeah. Yeah.
adaptability. And
It's,
that
and
almost
that's
always
what
seems to fall
everybody, yeah.
short.
That's the
Yeah.
Master Ken like joke, right? Or the
Right,
Jim
right,
Carrey
right.
on
Yeah.
Saturday Night Live. You
Yeah.
attacked me
Yeah.
wrong. That's that
Yeah.
whole thing. Like, you got to attack me like this.
In
Yeah, yeah,
living
yeah.
color.
In
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
model, that's how it was. Yeah, you can't change the
Yeah.
attack and then suddenly now my technique doesn't work. That's pure process based, and it can lead to beautiful movement. Arguably,
Right.
every beautiful dance routine we've ever watched, or every gymnastics routine we've ever watched, figure skate, whatever that's meant to look like a certain thing, pure process. And if you hone that process well, it's going to look awesome. Like a lot of the people that poke fun at the nunchuck and bow twirling people that do all those crazy tournaments where there's a kata section where they just show their kata and they like, oh, that would never work in a fight, is like the thing people say.
Yeah.
Flip side, if you find value in that old cool stuff, you want to learn swords and spears, you're probably not going to expect to use them much outside that setting. And
Yeah.
if you only had, I want to be able to defend myself against violence, you are probably never going to stumble across Kukishin kata, sword kata to the kinchi or something. It's not going to happen. You're
Yeah.
not going
Odds
to
are
straight
low.
down.
Odds are low. One thing that was a
Yeah.
huge influence on me years ago was when Matt Thornton was talking about, and I think he used Tai Chi as an example, and purely as an example. I don't think it was criticizing Tai Chi in any way or its practitioners. He was saying, if you tell me that you're practicing Tai Chi because you feel like it's good for your health, you enjoy doing it, that yeah, I think that what he was saying was, hey, that sounds great. Maybe I'll go ahead and do that for you. But now if you're good, do that with you. But
Yes.
if you are making a claim that this is now good for self-defense, then you have some explaining to do at that point. You have to be able to prove on some level that this would actually be good in self-defense. We
No,
have to inside ourselves
absolutely.
as well. If all I'm doing is practicing choreography and I happen to enjoy it, and I do happen to enjoy practicing
Great.
old school Japanese martial arts, then
Yeah.
actually I'm going to do that for its own sake. I'm going to be doing that. If some of us actually want to take those snapshots from history, those joint locks and the throws and this striking methodologies and stand up grappling and everything, the sword, all of the weapons you're training that you could find in old school Japanese jujitsu. If you then make a claim that now I want this to be effective in self defense, or I'm good, you happen to be in law enforcement, I want this to be effective in law enforcement, then logic will
Yeah.
say that I
That's
need
harder.
to change my training methodologies. And I think the thing that we found most effective for that right now is ecological dynamics in the various parts,
Tools
constraints
there.
led
And yeah.
approach,
Yeah.
yeah, differential learning, a whole bunch of other
The-
things that have been proven now.
100% true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You may end up with luck where you're
that's
practicing
right.
whatever old kata happens to be really effective that one day you need it.
Yeah.
And in which case, congrats. It worked out. You got to enjoy yourself and it worked to protect yourself. But yeah, you can't
Yeah.
just
Well,
automatically assume it's going to happen that way. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No. So we see this all the time with it on our own lineages, our own Japanese lineages, and in other traditional martial arts as well. They can point to a handful of teachers. They say, "Yeah, but look at so and so
Yeah.
sensei and how effective they are." And I think that there's a bit of a mistake there. I'm thinking that this person, of the hundreds of thousands of people over the years who have trained these particular people that you could point to who happen to be good fighters, that that their particular training methodology will work for everybody. When it's
Yeah.
a
And you're
bit of a
biasing the
biasing,
group. Yeah.
yeah,
100%. Yes. Because of course that
yeah.
person is the teacher because nobody else could beat him. He happened to be good
Yeah,
at
yeah,
this.
sure. Yeah, sure. That's one. Yeah, and so maybe information processing is going to work for some small percentage of people over the long term, and that particular person is going to end up being a really good fighter. Great, and that is one way to learn things. And so we're not saying, I think, when we're practicing this stuff that there's something wrong with the lineage because there's not. That's probably
You know,
we had one old
man.
school owner ask us, so where does the lineage fall apart? it, I think it's maybe the wrong question. Actually, what we're talking about is training methodology, coaching methodology,
Yeah.
and not
That's probably
necessarily what the
the
lineage
differentiator.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. By all means, enjoy all of it. Know the difference of what you're after that day. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
I personally enjoy the old stuff. And maybe it happens to be useful for something, but I also enjoy, could I put some of this skill to use if I needed to? And I just
Mhm.
know on any particular moment which thing I'm working on. I also enjoy, I've been involved in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community for a while. And some of the
Mhm.
folks are making the same critiques there now, saying, oh, now it's become so sport adapted and it's not meant for protecting yourself anymore, even though that's what it got known for. And it got known for randori style, like sparring or rolling. And now people
Mhm.
are doing an information processing purist choreography based approach, and it's taking the liveness away from it, or what Matt Thornton would call aliveness. And those guys are
Right.
right too. But the people who like doing the sport BJJ should enjoy doing it. But if their coach wants to be clear and say, hey, we are very much a sports school, we could also do some self defense stuff, but it's not the same thing. Great. Because I think that's enjoyable also. It's just, there's not necessarily tie over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only difference.
And again, whether it's modern martial art, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or yeah, we have to look at, we can't necessarily judge purely on the most successful people,
No.
because you've been a school owner, and every school owner that I've ever you've spoken to, knows that hundreds and hundreds of people will come through the doors over the years, and only a small select few will stay. And so, what happened to those hundreds or
Yeah.
thousands, or whoever knows around the world, millions of people who just quit? Maybe that particular school's training methodology just wasn't for them. Maybe it was too rough for them. Maybe it was too sporty. Maybe it was too patty cake for them. Maybe it was too informational processing. We
Yeah,
really
yeah,
don't know
or too
because they're gone.
historical. Yeah, yeah. Somebody
It
maybe
was too
didn't
historical. They weren't
care about
interested in that.
sports.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A, totally
absolutely.
fine. B, don't change your pursuit just to please somebody else, obviously. If you're a school owner and you like doing sword, please continue to do sword. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It helps people learn a culture and a tradition. Don't abandon that just because Joe Schmo down the way wanted to learn a better Superman punch. That's
Right.
okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, part of this does speak to the idea that you got to just know and just be clear about what you're teaching when. You could tell them, hey, well, on Monday we do old school sword from this lineage and that lineage and what have you. And on Tuesdays, we forget all about that and do pure sparring or whatever your mix is that you enjoy.
Mhm.
Do that.
Mhm.
Um, but it also helps us recognize that, and we go into this further in one of our lessons, but let's call out the idea that you can, and an advisor gave me this idea when I was running a large public school, a large public martial arts school, was you got to teach that Pareto principle 80-20 kind of thing. There's some people on that, if you got a retired NFL guy who walks in and wants to learn martial arts, he barely needs you. He could probably
Sure.
watch some YouTube video of whatever you wanted to teach him and be as good as you quick.
Mhm.
And there's somebody out there who, like, they're just not going to show up. They're not going to try that hard. They want to say they come to class a couple times. No matter how good your lesson is, no matter how much you care, they're just not going to get that good at it. So be it. But that mass group, you got to find the best lesson plan you can make, the best curriculum you can develop, the best delivery of that you can create. So they've got the best chance. Oh man, I was listening to somebody rant about, there's some commercials out there that talk about, I think it was McDonald's, like the last time the last time you got a Happy Meal, but you didn't know it was the last time.
Uh-huh.
And it struck me as like a martial arts lesson. If you're teaching somebody a martial arts, damn, like for lots of reasons, some of them sad, some of them not, like that could be the last lesson that guy ever gets or that gal ever gets. If someone
It's
comes to
true.
you and comes to your martial arts school and attends a lesson, or maybe a lot, maybe they're there for years and one day they're just never there anymore. You want them to have the best experience you could that last lesson, or all of them, but right up through, because maybe that's the last lesson before they actually need that stuff. Or maybe it's the last lesson they ever get before they have to move. They have to leave town, and maybe they want to share this with somebody someday. And it'd be nice if they knew what it was and were good at it. So whether you're doing the historical stuff, you want to make sure you preserve it so that their lesson, they got like the best thing they were going to get. And if they share something, it's accurate. You shared them the right information. Or if you're doing an outcome focused lesson where they're learning to actually move against resistance, you want to know that, hey man, if this guy gets in a fight tomorrow, or if this person's walking with my mom down the street and they get attacked, I want that person to step up and defend my mom.
Sure.
You want them to be good. So
Sure.
in whatever end or mix of the variables you've got in mind, deliver the best you can. It might be the last shot you get at it. That was deep for me. Ooh, that's going to change the way I teach.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it goes back to what we're talking about at the beginning of the is being honest with yourself and your students about exactly what you're doing. If you're working on traditional lineage material, and this is going to involve some amount of choreography and information processing, you don't have to use those words exactly, but you be super honest about what you're actually teaching that day. And then if you are an ecological coach, you're honest about what you're doing that day and how it might not exactly look like what the lineage material looks like either. And I wrote a blog about this, and we've talked about this a whole bunch of times. Is when you sometimes, and I've seen this with in our systems, our traditional systems as well, where there are coaches and students who say, "I want this to be super effective," and so what they do is they go from information processing, learning the choreography, and then they introduce sparring. And
Gosh,
then
yeah.
that's when the bloody noses happen, and people get
Yes.
scared and they leave the school because they have no experience with sparring. Maybe the coaches
Yeah.
aren't
They
there
think
aren't
it's all
enough
one thing.
coaches.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is I feel like this is where ecological dynamics bridges the gap there, is because you can add in what we would call randori, or in an ecological dynamics there might be constraints led approach games and a whole bunch of other different coaching paradigms there, where intensity essentially self-regulates and there are enough constraints in place where people are not getting injured. Meanwhile, they're
Yeah. Boy.
practicing just variability to no end, and
Yeah.
they
It's up
get
to the
themselves
coach
into these
to guide that
scrambles. Yeah,
more.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because I think you've experienced this as well. In the BJJ world, there's that like positional sparring or
Yeah,
situational sparring.
yeah,
And it's maybe fun, but it rarely, without really explicit guidance, it rarely leads to a specific outcome or learning a particular way to do something. And that's the other end of that scale is, man, just going for it. Even if that's what you know, you might not get that skill. Like we were saying before, you're not going to just spar or roll in a BJJ context and learn Shinen Fudo Jutai just caught the number 3,
right, yeah,
right?
sure, yeah,
But a really good coach, really good instructor knows the in and outs and the where and the why that particular technique is written out the way it is, and can say, hey, we're going to challenge the pieces of this, not in the tactical performance games way, which is useful. It's not quite the model that we follow, but they can still look at it and say, all right, I want you to learn with your body to do these things. And then later on say, hey, by the way, if you do them in this order, it's called this in Shinen Fudoryu. It's this kata, it's that kata, whatever it is. But otherwise, yeah, you could just have random sparring or you could just have just pure choreography and the gap between them never gets bridged.
yeah. Where you and I have found where the gap does get bridged
Yeah.
is if maybe you could think of specific games that we've done, but when you and I have trained, or we trained with other people, with constraints led games, where
Oh,
you can
no,
only
you
do this and I have
can.
a particular object and this person has their own objective as well, and so
Yes.
they're not only trying to stop me from doing what I'm trying to do within a very constrained thing, they're trying to do they're trying to do something too, right? So
That's how
they
it
have
is. Yeah.
that's how these things are. It's funny enough, sure, we're not going to see specific kata in its choreography like a million monkeys typing and creating Shakespeare or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't see that. We don't see an entire lineage being produced, but we do
Yeah.
where when you have specific constraints in place, things like what we call like ganseki nagi, omotigaku, all these different things that we have names for emerge spontaneously, and students don't necessarily know what those names are, and as instructors we do, and we might be able to later on at the end of class, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, and say, here's some of the stuff that you did, by the way, in the lineage material that thing has a name. and
Yep.
and when we
Cool.
practice the lineage material, there's a very specific way that we like to practice that, but you came up with that on your own spontaneously, which is like magic.
Yeah. You'll never be able to convince them that it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Like, it's the
yeah, yeah,
opposite
yeah,
problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah. They did it
we couldn't stop
spontaneously
them.
without
Yeah.
instruction. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. The last time I was visiting a dojo in Japan and I got to be a guest instructor, I had a game that I was helping. I didn't call it a game because they're taking themselves quite appropriately seriously, but a series of constraints that I progressively laid onto their experience that you and I would refer to as these constraint-led games. And I was doing it from a perspective that we often don't see in the Takamatsu then is the bottom of a throw, like someone gets thrown and is resisting their way out of it. For the
Yeah.
top person who's usually holding a limb and pinning them down, often in preparation for a stop kick of some kind. And I had them
Mhm.
practice some nuances to that phase and to see like, how can we hold them there? And you're giving the parameters. I saw some of the bottom people, and this was not a BJJ class. And to my knowledge, these students had never experienced that sort of training. I saw some of the people that were being thrown and being held down doing like X guard entries into, they didn't get like a rear sweep or anything, but X guard entries into basic sweeps.
Sure.
That so somebody in Brazil be like, oh yeah, of course, that's this kind of, or they've got whatever name in their lineage. And I'm seeing guys were literally crawling a leg over, trying to push the person away into what we would now call like a backside 50-50 into what could have been a
Mhm.
great heel hook.
Sure.
None of these guys knew that. None of them had ever practiced that. And I'm
Yeah, and
sitting
some
with
of
the
them are
instructor.
experienced to whatever to varying
Yeah.
degrees inside the traditional lineages that we train. But this is essentially their day one of doing
Yes.
these. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
It's
They had
wild.
no
Yeah,
experience of trying this, and they're doing what you wouldn't teach in a BJJ class on a very early day either, even
yeah,
though it's fundamental for them, but it's advanced in a skill these
right.
people had never even practiced.
Yeah, and
Uh,
so in
yeah.
case we decide to publish this conversation someday, right? Just for context for the viewer or the listener, right? In a lot of these traditional Japanese styles that we train in, it looks stand-up grappling sometimes where somebody will it would be like attached striking. Somebody grabs you, throws a punch, or somebody from a distance throws a punch, and then they're trying to grab you, throw you to the ground as the person defending themselves. You're then doing some series of choreographed counters, like if you're practicing in a traditional lineage way,
Yeah.
where you're
Yeah.
practicing one technique, one kind of throw. Oftentimes it ends up where, like you said, someone is oftentimes flat on their back or on their side. You're pinning them with one knee, probably stomping on their head while you're holding one arm. Oftentimes, what might have been their weapon arm, because we're talking about a lineage where
Yeah.
somebody would have been possibly drawing at that close distance, maybe a short sword or knife or something, right? And then oftentimes that's where the technique stops. In now, of
Yeah.
course, old school battlefield, that might have been super relevant because now I'm holding someone down. Maybe I'm now drawing a short sword to stab them, or I'm waiting for a guy with a spear to come and finish him off. But also because I'm holding them in place, I can have a line of sight of across the entire battlefield around me,
Yeah.
so that I
Yeah.
can then escape or defend myself against the next person because this is old school battlefield stuff.
Yeah.
And
And
so
that would have
that's
been
why
a great
oftentimes we
game.
just don't practice being on the bottom.
Boy, I now wish I had thought to do secondary attacker during that game.
Yeah, that would be a great maybe
There's your next
differential
free one,
learning. You're
everybody.
adding noise into
Yeah.
the system. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Try that as a game next time is get to that bottom of a throw, choose whatever basic throw. Just also pull them down, hold on their arm and try to pin them down with your shin. And their job is maybe some variant on getting away or knocking you down or what have you. But the real task is going to be doing maybe Ichimoji basic against the next punch coming in. And
Sure.
that person gets to work around and choose where to punch from.
Yeah, sure.
So
So
can you use that person as a shield? Can you bump off appropriately to move? These are the kind of things that will make your training, this old style training, come alive. It's awesome.
it's true. Yeah. And when you're in a modern dojo, it's fun. It's fun. It gets rowdy. It gets goofy sometimes, or whatever the case may be. It's always intense. It's always a workout that people are hoping to get just by nature
Oh,
of
of course.
the controlled sort of chaos. I think there was another blogger who was ecological coach who called it micro dosing chaos or something
I
along
like
those
that.
lines. And I thought that was great. I thought that was
I
great,
like
because there's a ton of variability, but it's within really safe constraints.
that. Yeah. That's your
But there's
job is
not
to
a
get them
specific
safely there.
thing. Yeah. Right. At some point, there's no specific things that, oh, you have to only do this thing.
Yeah.
You can do anything within these constraints. And then adding, I love that idea of adding that another person in there. You have
Yeah.
to add,
Correct.
we always talk about increasing noise to amplify the signal. And that's, I think, what would happen in those
Yes.
situations.
Yes. And there's another one, everybody get your differential learning on. Yeah. That's a lot. I like it a lot. I think I'm good with calling that there.
Yeah, sure.